This video is for the sanding blocks and basic joints activity. So you're going to be given a board like this here that is just a little bit over 2 3/4 inches wide. It's 3/4 of an inch thick, and then roughly 18 to 20 inches long. Out of this board, you're going to need to get these different boards that are listed on this paper. This demonstration is going to show you how to cut the boards, how to lay everything out so you can get these to what you need. But if we take a look at this, we're going to be cutting 3 sanding blocks that are all the same size. They're 2 3/4 inches wide by 4 1/4 inches long, and then they're the 3/4 of an inch thick. After you cut those 3 boards, then we're going to cut this board, which is a basic joints board. The basic joints board is going to have a miter on it, which is a 45-degree miter. A miter joint is used for many moldings and like picture frames to make joints so that you can go around corners and put picture frames together. The next joint we'll be making is the dado. And the dado is a groove across the grain of the wood. Dados are very, very common joints used in woodworking. They're joints that are the most common to insert shelves in a solid fixed shelf in, say, a bookshelf or cupboards, as well as many other places. We'll be using the dado on our drawers for our tables. The third joint that we'll be doing is a rabbet, and a rabbet is similar to a dado except for it is on the edge of the board or the end of the board. Could go either place. A rabbet is used also very often in woodworking, but it's on the ends of the boards to insert the top and put the sides and the top together, or the sides and the bottom of the cabinet together, as well as we'll be using them also in our drawers for our table. So I'm going to go through the tools that we're going to be using, and then I'm going to go through how to cut out these boards using these different tools. Okay, these are the tools that we're going to be using. First of all, we'll be using a tape measure. We've got to make sure we measure and get things precise. In this activity, you're going to be graded on how well you measure and how accurately your cuts are. So you've got to have a good tape measure, make sure that you are very careful in your measurements. We're going to need a pencil to do marking. We're going to need a square. Now we could use this kind of square, which is a combination square. It's a combination square because it does multiple things. It does 90 degrees, it does 45 degrees. It's got a level on it. It's got a ruler on it. It's adjustable, okay? So you move back and forth. It's a handy square to use. We could also use a tri-square or a speed square, or any of the other squares that are in the cabinet. We're going to use a claw hammer, a wood chisel. This one happens to be a 1/2 inch wide wood chisel. I've also got 3/4 inch wide chisels that could be used. A hand plane, which this one is a bench plane, and this is to take the wood down to thickness. We're going to trim off very small shavings with it, and then we're going to be using what's called a back saw, and this is just a little hand saw that has this very thick back on it, making it very rigid so that when you cut it stays nice and straight. And so these are the tools that we're going to be using for this activity. Step one of the board that we need to do is to get this down to width. Now when you get the board, it's going to be just a little bit more than 2 3/4 of an inch wide, and so we need to trim off on one of the edges, in this case about a 1/16 of an inch. So we're going to use a clamp or a vise to hold it down on the table. Okay, make sure you do that. And we're going to use the bench plane to trim it. Now bench planes work really good as long as they stay adjusted. Right now this one is not adjusted to cut anything. So if I slide this over it, it's not cutting anything. And the way to adjust it is you got the wheel right here in the middle. As you roll the wheel out, the blade goes down. And so what that means is this blade, it'll stick down below the surface, the bottom surface of the plane. As you roll the wheel in, the blade will retract up in. So a good rule of thumb is you want to start with the blade kind of retracted up in so it's not cutting anything, and then you roll it out. And to do that, I'm going to roll it clockwise. You got to roll it a little bit to get it going, and then you'll feel resistance, and you roll it, and then you test. And it's close. It's already starting to cut just a little bit. I might need to go just a little bit more, but and actually that's what we want really. You want to adjust it so that it's got just a little tiny curls like this. Okay. Once you have it that way, then it should cut for you. But when you set it down, set it on its side and not on the bottom. If you set it on the bottom, it's going to jam the blade back up in there and then it won't cut anymore. So now it's just a matter of taking nice, clean swaths. This is cutting really, really good. And then periodically check and see where you're at. Now I still got a little bit more to go. Put it back in the clamp. I'm probably about there now. And that's looking really good. Notice that I measure in multiple places. Okay? And there it is, 2 3/4. The next step is to do the layout. To lay out, we're going to have to use our square and our pencil, and we're going to cut our sanding blocks first. Now the sanding blocks, if you remember, are 2 3/4 by 4 1/4. So we have our 2 3/4. Now we need to measure our 4 1/4 this way. So I'm just going to put my tape measure here. Come and measure 4 1/4 inches. I'm going to take the square, place it on here. Make sure it's tight against the edge so we have a nice square line across. Then I'm also going to take and transfer that line to the edge so that when I cut, I know I'm going straight up and down. And that's the only one I'm going to lay out at this point. Okay. Now we're going to take the back saw and cut this. So the important thing here though is when I cut this, because we're being accurate, I need to make sure that I have my full 4 1/4 inches here. So when I cut, I'm actually going to be cutting on this inside part of the line here so that the block stays the 4 1/4. And ideally what I'll do is I'll cut right on the edge of that line, or right towards the middle of part of that line. So I'm going to place it in the clamp here. And using my thumb as a guide, and you can slide it against the thumb, I'm going to line it up here. I'm going to make sure I try to go straight up and down with that line, and I'm going to pull it towards me just a little bit to get it a little bit going. I'm going to watch as you go. Cut straight up and down, and as you get closer to the other edge, slow down so you don't pick out a lot of the grain. Okay, so now we have one of the sanding blocks, and it should measure right at 4 1/4 by the 2 3/4. Okay, put your name on it. Now, if it's not quite right, if it's not exactly like what you want, you have 2 more chances. You're only going to turn in one of these sanding blocks. So you have 2 more chances to get another perfect sanding block, okay? In this video, I'm not going to do the other 2 sanding blocks. They're done the same way. You measure now, 4 1/4, cut it off, measure again, 4 1/4, and cut it off.